They say truth hits you like a punch, but sometimes it taps you on the shoulder with a picture frame. Jasmine Mitchell was 24 years old, but in that moment she felt 4 again, the exact age, staring back at her from the golden frame on the hallway wall of the Blackwell mansion. "My God, it's me!" The words slipped out like breath after a long swim. She hadn't seen that photo in 20 years, and yet there it was, displayed like a relic of someone else's memory. Same wild curls, same pink dress, same shy smile, like a whisper from a life that was stolen, then shoved into silence. Why was her photo hanging in the private wing of one of Chicago's richest families? And more importantly, what else had they taken from her? But first, leave a comment below to let us know where you are watching from, and if you like fascinating stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have another incredible story, and there are many surprises waiting for you in the next parts. That wasn't just a photo. It was evidence. It was betrayal. It was a childhood memory buried under foster homes, social worker shrugs, and the half-truths people call what's best for the child. Jasmine had grown up in the shadows of other people's lives, bouncing from family to family like a package no one wanted to sign for. Every scrap of her past had been erased with polite apologies and bureaucratic fires. Literally, the official files were gone, burned in an accident, but nothing burned completely, did it? Because here it was, proof that someone knew, someone remembered, someone chose to display her like a secret hidden in plain sight. And the man who walked past her 30 minutes earlier, flawless tux, zero recognition, was Richard Blackwell himself, the billionaire, the philanthropist, the man whose home cost more to stand in than Jasmine made in 3 months. He looked straight through her like glass, like a ghost. Only ghosts don't blush at their own reflection. So she smiled and swallowed her scream. Then came the voice. "Hey, you! What are you doing here?" Security. His tone was sharper than the edge of the tray in Jasmine's trembling hands. She'd wondered where staff weren't allowed. "Sorry," she said, eyes wide, mouth rehearsed. "Got lost looking for the bathroom." Her voice didn't shake. She was too good for that. Years in the service industry had taught her that survival was an art, and Jasmine was Picasso with a poker face. But as she turned to leave, she memorized every detail of that frame, every edge, every light reflection, every inch of the wall around it. She would see that photo again on her terms, because one thing was now seared into her mind. Someone had lied, not just to her, but about her, and that lie had a price tag. Back in the main hall, she moved like a phantom with a tray, scanning the room, locking eyes on Richard Blackwell. There he was, glowing under the chandeliers, delivering a speech about his charitable foundation for orphans and lost children. Applause surrounded him like a halo. He smiled like someone who had buried pain and built a brand from the tombstone. Jasmine couldn't look away. She studied every word he spoke like she was decoding a threat. When he said, "Second chances heal broken families," she saw his fingers twitch ever so slightly. When he said, "I lost my daughter in a tragic accident," she saw the guilt in his throat, swollen like a lie that didn't swallow right. And that's when it hit her. Not like a punch, not like a tap, but like an explosion she'd spent years suppressing. He didn't lose her. Jasmine had always wondered why she wasn't good enough, why no one ever came for her, why her history had chapters with no title. But now, watching this man soak in applause for surviving a tragedy he may have manufactured, the answer screamed in silence. This wasn't grief. It was theater. He had monetized mourning. And she had been the footnote he edited out of the script. But the curtain was about to rise, because Jasmine wasn't a ghost. She was the glitch in his narrative, the receipt for a lie 20 years in the making, and she wasn't leaving without getting paid. In truth, in justice, in the kind of reckoning that rattles bloodlines. So here's the part where you, watching this, might feel that knot tighten in your chest, that fire crawl up your spine, because maybe you've been there too, walking through someone else's house, someone else's version of the truth, and realizing your whole life was built on someone else's denial. Maybe you've been made invisible by people who should have protected you. Maybe, just maybe, you've spent years thinking you weren't worth remembering. But let me tell you something Jasmine Mitchell figured out in a mansion filled with secrets. You're not forgotten. You're filed away in the wrong chapter, but the ink is still wet, and you can rewrite everything. So if you feel that spark rising right now, don't ignore it, because what comes next? Jasmine's not asking for justice. She's coming to take it. Stick with this story. Subscribe, follow, share it, because the truth Jasmine just uncovered, it's only the first domino. And by the end of it, the entire empire of Richard Blackwell is going to collapse under the weight of one photo, one daughter, and one very dangerous question. What happens when the girl you erased comes back, with a pen in her hand and fire in her veins? He stood at the center of the ballroom like a lighthouse, illuminated, admired, untouchable. Richard Blackwell didn't speak to the room, he performed for it. His voice was smooth, practiced, dripping with empathy that felt imported. "We do this for the children," he said, raising his glass as the crowd nodded like bobbleheads in designer suits. Jasmine stood near the back, still in uniform, still invisible, but her eyes were locked on him. Every word was a rehearsal, every pause a punctuation mark meant to draw applause. He spoke of second chances with the confidence of a man who never had to ask for one. He wore grief like a Rolex, not because it meant something, but because it cost a lot and caught the light when he waved his hand. His philanthropy wasn't a purpose. It was a costume stitched from the pain of others, and Jasmine, still reeling from the photo in the hallway, began to see it all for what it was. Theater for the powerful. A glass wall, shiny clean but hollow. He said he knew what it was like to lose a daughter. Jasmine clenched the tray in her hand as her mind replayed nights alone in unfamiliar homes, curled under thin blankets in unfamiliar rooms. She remembered birthday candles that never got lit, gifts that never arrived, and the quiet ache of being unwanted. Strangers called her sweetheart, honey, problem. No one called her Jasmine. She was passed around like an old suitcase, holding stories no one cared to open. And now the man who might have abandoned her was using that very abandonment as his resume? "Loss changes you," he said into the microphone, voice thick with designer sorrow. She felt her stomach twist. How do you mourn a child you never looked for, she thought, her breath shallow. He didn't lose a daughter. He misplaced her like a tax form, then built an empire from the refund. And just when Jasmine thought she'd heard it all, he said something that hit like a hammer. Sometimes the ones we love the most are taken too soon, and all we can do is keep their memory alive. That was it. That was the moment Jasmine stopped listening and started watching. She stopped seeing a grieving father and started seeing the cracks in his face. It wasn't sadness she saw. It was salesmanship. Richard Blackwell didn't mourn, he managed. He didn't reflect, he rebranded. That photo in his hallway wasn't a tribute, it was an accessory, a private relic he could look at in secret. Not to feel guilt, but to feel clever. He didn't just bury his wife and daughter, he built a platform out of their graves. His grief had talking points, his trauma had a marketing department. And Jasmine finally saw the truth. His guilt wasn't grief, it was a business model. He had turned a tombstone into a tax shelter, pain into public relations, and sorrow into social clout. She watched him touch his chest with practiced sincerity, as if his heart had ever once been in the same room as his decisions. And the applause kept coming. That was the worst part. The world kept clapping. But Jasmine wasn't clapping. She wasn't crying either. Something colder had taken root in her chest. Not numbness, precision. Because this wasn't about feeling anymore. This was about doing. This wasn't about recovery. It was about reversal. She didn't need closure, she needed clarity and justice. Not the kind that wears robes and swings gavels, but the kind that walks in quietly and rearranges the entire room. She would not wait for the world to find her. She would confront the man who erased her and make him say her name. Not in a whisper, not in regret. In public, on stage, under lights bright enough to bleach the lies out of his mouth. She would hold a mirror to his legacy and let everyone watch it shatter. Richard Blackwell thought his sins had aged into legend. Jasmine was about to remind him that some ghosts grow up, some disappearances learn how to speak, and some daughters become storms. Because that photo wasn't an accident. It wasn't some sentimental decoration hung out of grief. It was proof. Proof that Richard remembered. Proof that he chose silence. It was the crack in the dam, and Jasmine was done pretending to be a drop in his flood. She wasn't a memory. She was a reckoning, and she had just decided where the flood would begin. But this is where you, listening now, need to take a breath and ask yourself something. How many polished smiles have you clapped for without asking what they're hiding behind them? How many success stories are just cover-ups in tuxedos? If you've ever suspected that the most respected man in the room might also be the one with the most to hide, then Jasmine's story isn't just a tale, it's a mirror. And it's time we stopped looking away. This is where the story stops whispering and starts roaring. And if you believe lies shouldn't be louder than truth, share this right now. Because the world has enough polished villains. What it needs are witnesses who aren't afraid to say, "I see you." Jasmine saw him, and she didn't blink. You shouldn't either. Stay with this story, because the stage is set, the curtain's about to rise, and next time the spotlight won't be on Richard Blackwell's philanthropy. It'll be on the daughter he never thought would find her way home. The next time Jasmine saw Marcus, it was like walking into a memory that had been waiting for the right key. He was drying glasses behind the catering bar at the Chicago Symphony Center, a spot he worked for 20 years. Long enough to know the sins of the rich better than their sommeliers did. His apron was stained, but his gaze was clear. Sharp in a way that told you he noticed the things most people hoped would go unseen. Marcus wasn't just a bartender. He was the unofficial historian of Chicago's elite, a man whose memory was sharper than most security cameras and 10 times more reliable. Jasmine waited until there was no one in earshot, then slid behind the bar like she belonged there. "Marcus," she whispered, "what do you know about Richard Blackwell?" She didn't expect what happened next. He choked on his coffee. "Girl," he said, glancing over his shoulder, "you don't want to mess with that man. He's got roots in everything. Finance, politics, the charity circuit. Tentacles, like an octopus with a Rolex." Jasmine kept her voice low but steady. "I think he's my father." Marcus went still. "The daughter?" he said, almost to himself. "I thought that was just rumor." She leaned in. "What rumor?" He exhaled hard, leaned closer. "Years ago, back when his first wife died, people whispered about a daughter who vanished. No funeral, no photo in the paper, just gone. They said the wife died in a car accident, but even that sounded off. There was money, lots of it. A life insurance policy that made Blackwell untouchable overnight." Jasmine's breath hitched. Her mind immediately jumped to the photo, the whispers at the gala, the lies dressed as grief. "Some families bury secrets so deep," Marcus muttered, "they forget where the graves are. But secrets like that don't stay buried forever, not when there's blood on the roots." And that's when the timelines snapped together like magnets. Jasmine had been 4 when her adoption records stopped making sense. She'd been told her birth parents died, no names, no funeral, just ashes of a life she'd never really owned. But Marcus's words lit a fuse in her memory. Her age, the accident, the insurance, they all lined up like fingerprints on a forgotten door. "You're telling me this wasn't an accident?" she asked. Marcus looked her dead in the eye. "I'm saying I've seen monsters who smile for cameras and cry for checks. And Blackwell, he ain't grieving, he's calculating." Jasmine's hands were cold, her voice colder. "I need to know what happened." Marcus hesitated, then nodded. "Start with the adoption agencies." And watch your back. That man doesn't lose things by mistake. The phrase echoed through her chest like a warning etched in stone. She wasn't curious anymore. She was cornered by a truth too big to ignore. That night, Jasmine stopped playing the victim and started building a case. Not in court, but in silence, in stealth. She created fake social media profiles and joined adoption support groups, scouring old message boards for whispers of missing children in questionable agencies. She found redacted documents, broken links, names that led nowhere, until one hit, Helena Blackwell, children's rights activist, died in an accident 2 weeks after announcing she was investigating irregularities in private adoption centers. Jasmine stared at the screen, her chest tightening. That was her mother. She didn't need a DNA test. She could feel it in her bones. Helena wasn't just her biological link. She was the reason Jasmine still had fire in her blood. And suddenly, it all came together. Her mother had been silenced, her father had profited. And Jasmine, she had been lost, not by chance, but by design. This wasn't just about family. It was about conspiracy, about a woman who died trying to expose the truth, and a daughter who would finish what she started. From that moment forward, Jasmine was no longer trying to be found. She was tracking a legacy stolen, voices erased, and lives rewritten to fit a lie. This was no longer a search for roots. It was a hunt for accountability. And if you've ever wondered how injustice hides itself, here's your answer. In paperwork, in eulogies, in foundations with gold-lettered logos that wash the blood off money. Jasmine wasn't chasing a man anymore. She was chasing a system that had let that man thrive. But here's the part that matters to you. Because whether or not you've lived Jasmine's exact pain, you've seen it. You've seen the people who rise on reputations they didn't earn and bury the ones who tried to tell the truth. You've watched villains get awards while the victims disappear into footnotes. This isn't just her story. It's a signal flare, a reminder that silence isn't safety, it's strategy for the people who profit from your absence. So what do you do when the face on your wall turns out to be the mask of your enemy? You take off the gloves, you build your evidence, and you stop asking for the truth to appear. You make it undeniable. Jasmine is doing exactly that. Because predators always think they've cleaned up their tracks. But here's what they never count on. Survivors who grow up with sharp memories and nothing left to lose. Jasmine isn't chasing a father. She's hunting a predator. And predators always leave trails. If this part of her story opens something inside you, rage, recognition, resolve, then do something right now. Follow this journey. Because Jasmine's just picked up the scent. And the next thing she finds, it won't be a whisper. It'll be the first roar of justice coming for the man who thought she'd never rise from the ashes. Margaret Santos didn't ask questions when Jasmine slid into the booth across from her at the corner cafe. She didn't have to. At 65, with decades behind her as a private investigator for women escaping abusive marriages and fraudulent inheritances, Margaret knew the look. Jasmine wore it like armor. Eyes that had stopped crying and started calculating. Margaret stirred her coffee slowly, studying the young woman's posture, the tension in her fingers, the silence between her words. "I need a favor," Jasmine said quietly. Margaret raised an eyebrow. "From the way you're breathing, I already know it's not small," Jasmine laid it out. Richard Blackwell, the photo, the whispers, the file that didn't exist. Margaret listened, took notes, then nodded slowly. "You're not looking for your father," she said. "You're hunting a man who used to think he couldn't be touched. I've waited a long time to help someone like you." The trail began like most lies do, in paperwork. Margaret's contacts came through with archived insurance filings, property transfers, and hospital records that were never meant to resurface. What she uncovered shattered any illusion Jasmine still clung to. There it was in ink. A forged death certificate for a 4-year-old girl named Jasmine Helena Blackwell. Filed 3 days after Helena's car crash. The cause of death? Listed as complications from internal injuries sustained in the same incident that killed her mother. But the signature on the form didn't match the attending physician's name. In fact, there was no physician listed. Margaret leaned back in her chair, holding the document with latex gloves like it might catch fire. This wasn't just a clerical error, she said. It was a hit job, on paper. Jasmine's throat closed. Her existence had been crossed out with a pen. Not lost, erased. Your father cashed out $500,000 in life insurance on you, Margaret continued. While you were alive in foster care, he was telling the world you were buried next to your mother and using that lie to launch a foundation. Jasmine stared at the evidence, her own name printed under a lie. Her childhood, her entire sense of origin, wasn't just stolen, it was sold. And then came the twist that shattered her composure. Helena didn't die instantly in the crash. Margaret found the paramedic report. Helena had made it to the hospital, conscious, awake, and her final words, documented by a nurse, were 6 syllables that echoed like thunder in Jasmine's soul. Protect my daughter from the monster. Jasmine's knees buckled. The monster. She had said it. She had named it. Not the accident, not the fire, him. Richard Blackwell wasn't just the man who abandoned her. He was the man her mother died warning the world about. Jasmine folded the report in trembling hands, breathing like someone who had just broken the surface after nearly drowning. What kind of man murders a family and then donates in their name? What kind of world applauds while he gives speeches about compassion built on corpses? That was the moment Jasmine changed. No more doubt, no more hesitation. She didn't just have a story, she had ammunition. She wasn't the missing child anymore. She was the return of consequences. Margaret looked at her with something like pride, or maybe caution. What do you plan to do? She asked. Jasmine didn't answer with words. She picked up the file, gripped it like a blade, and stood. I'm not here to ask for justice, she said. I'm here to deliver it. And just like that, she became what Richard never expected. A daughter trained by silence and sharpened by lies. A woman who didn't need a courtroom, just a mic, just a crowd. Just one moment to rewrite 20 years of fake grief with one single undeniable truth. Richard built a legacy out of blood-stained receipts, turning every death certificate into a donation drive. But Jasmine now held the truth, and the difference between a myth and a reckoning is evidence with a voice behind it. She smiled as she stepped out of Margaret's office, not because she was happy, but because she knew what ghosts do when they've had enough. They walk through doors, they haunt legacies, they speak when silence becomes unbearable. Jasmine wasn't planning revenge. She was planning resurrection of her name, her mother's memory, and the thousands of children like her who were turned into statistics while monsters wore medals. If you've ever felt erased, replaced, or reduced to a name someone else filed away, then hear this: you are not paperwork, you are not forgotten, and you are not done. Because when lies are told loud enough, the only thing louder is the return of the truth. So follow this story, share it, remember it. Jasmine has the file, she has the fire, and now she has a plan. Stay with her, because the reckoning has just begun. It was the kind of night that made headlines before the speeches even began. The Blackwell Foundation's annual gala had pulled every thread of Chicago's high society into one marble-floored ballroom. Champagne shimmered, gowns sparkled, and Richard Blackwell glowed in his natural habitat, surrounded by adoration he'd purchased with other people's pain. He stood under a ceiling of crystal chandeliers, laughing beside mayors and media moguls, boasting about how many children his foundation had saved. What he didn't know, what no one knew, was that tonight his favorite ghost had returned. Not in chains, not in grief, but in armor. Jasmine moved through the crowd with a silver tray in her hands and a storm behind her eyes. She wasn't a caterer anymore. She was the climax to a lie that had gone on for 20 years too long. The moment cracked wide open when she stepped onto the stage. She didn't ask permission. She didn't wait for applause. She took the mic from the assistant like she was reclaiming oxygen. "Mr. Blackwell," she said, her voice calm, almost amused, "may I ask you something?" The crowd hushed. Richard blinked at her, confused. "Miss, aren't you supposed to be serving drinks?" Jasmine smiled. "I am, But as the daughter of orphans, your speech moved me." The silence thickened. "Especially the part where you said you lost a daughter. Can you tell us more about her?" Richard's face twitched. "It's a personal tragedy," he replied, rehearsed and polished. "I'd rather not." "That's a shame," Jasmine said, "because I have details." She paused, then dropped the line like a guillotine. "She didn't die in an accident. You abandoned her after killing her mother." "And she's right here." Gasps broke the room like glass. Richard's face drained to ash. Cameras clicked. Phones lit up. Jasmine reached into her bag and pulled out the first folder. "This is the forged death certificate you used to collect $500,000. She held it high. "This is the hospital report confirming my mother was alive for 2 hours and called you a monster before she died." Murmurs rolled through the crowd like thunder. "And this." She lifted an 8x10 photo, the one from his private hallway, now blown up on the ballroom's projection screen. "This is the photo you keep in your office, the one that says, 'To the most amazing dad in the world, I love you, Jasmine.'" The inscription hit like a gavel. Richard staggered. His mouth moved, but the sound betrayed him. "Lies. This is absurd." "Is it?" Jasmine turned to the crowd. "Because I also emailed journalists audio files of Richard admitting to his lawyer that he handled the problem of his wife and daughter. Did they get those?" Dozens of hands went up holding phones. "Confirmed. Sent. Published." Jasmine didn't shout. She didn't cry. She just stood in the epicenter of a crumbling legacy and held up the truth like a torch. "Tell us, Mr. Blackwell," she asked, eyes narrowed. "Do ghosts bleed, or just bankrupt hypocrites?" His knees buckled under the weight of his own fabrication, and in that moment Jasmine became more than a name, more than a child, more than a mistake he thought he'd buried. She became the reckoning he never saw coming, the proof that the truth doesn't stay dead, it just waits for the right voice to speak. Her voice didn't tremble, it carved. Her story didn't ask for belief, it demanded accountability. Her presence didn't ask for closure, it was the closing argument. Because when liars are exposed under lights they paid to install, they don't fight back, they shrink. The ballroom turned courtroom as sirens wailed in the distance. Jasmine leaned close enough for only him to hear. "You tried to erase me, but now the whole world will remember my name." Red and blue lights spilled across the ballroom windows as FBI agents entered the gala. The audience scattered. Board members whispered, donors deleted tweets, and Richard Blackwell stood paralyzed, while 2 agents read him his rights. His tuxedo looked suddenly absurd, like a costume for a man auditioning to be innocent. Handcuffs snapped closed around his wrists. Jasmine stepped back into the light, not as a waitress, not as a whisper, but as the last thing Richard ever expected her to be. Undeniable. And if this moment makes your blood heat, if this scene feels like the justice you've wanted to witness in your own life, then stay close. Because Jasmine's story isn't just a takedown. It's a mirror for every person who's been told to stay quiet, stay small, stay erased. It's a reminder that sometimes truth wears heels and walks straight into the ballroom with receipts. Share this. Remember this. Because ghosts don't haunt, they rebuild. And Jasmine, she's just getting started. 6 months after Richard Blackwell was led out of his own gala in handcuffs, Jasmine stood in an office that once belonged to him, but it didn't feel like revenge. It felt like reclamation. The marble floor hadn't changed, but the meaning under her feet had. The plaque on the door now read, Helena Blackwell Foundation, Executive Director Jasmine Mitchell. The foundation, stripped of fraud, flushed of secrets, was reborn. The same headlines that once praised Richard's philanthropy now called Jasmine the woman who turned a funeral into a revolution. She didn't just inherit a scandal, she repurposed it into reform. With the empire that tried to erase her, she built what they promised but never delivered. A ghost-turned architect of light. And for the first time in her life, Jasmine wasn't serving glasses at someone else's party. She was setting the table for the future. The numbers spoke louder than her father ever did. 5 new orphanages opened in under 6 months, 200 scholarships approved, 89 families reunited after being separated by corrupt adoption schemes. What Richard used as a stage, Jasmine turned into a sanctuary. She visited every site. She knew every child's name. And every time she walked into a room, she didn't speak about her tragedy. She showed them their possibility. He used a lie to build an empire, she once told a CNN anchor. I used his empire to build a future. The money that once insulated a murderer now insulated hope. She had not only exposed a monster, she had finished what her mother started, dismantling the illusion that power could protect you from truth. And truth, as Jasmine had proven, doesn't knock. It kicks the door in wearing heels and carrying facts. But for all the public triumphs, the most sacred moment was quiet. No cameras, no speeches, just Jasmine alone in a cemetery, standing in front of a new pink marble headstone that read, Helena Blackwell, Mother, Activist, Heroine. She fought for those who had no voice. Her daughter completed the mission. Jasmine knelt, hands resting lightly on the cold stone. We did it, Mom, she whispered. Her voice didn't tremble. Her tears didn't fall. They stayed tucked beneath her eyelids like raindrops waiting for spring. Because Helena hadn't died in vain. Her life was cut short, but her impact lived on through the daughter who grew from her shadow. Jasmine was the answer to her final prayer. Helena planted the seeds in fear, and Jasmine watered them with rage and resilience, until they became a forest too loud to ignore. And from that forest came something she never expected. Family. Not the one she was born into, but the one she built. Sarah, her mother's sister, had found her during the investigation. You have her eyes, she said when they met, holding an old photo of Helena. Your mother would be so proud of you. Sarah became more than an aunt. She became the root Jasmine had always been searching for. Marcus became more than a bartender. He became the foundation's event director, the man who guarded her story before she even knew it was hers. Margaret? She became the right hand to Jasmine's vision, scanning every document, chasing every corrupt corner of the adoption system with a sharp pen and a sharper will. Together, they weren't survivors. They were the bouquet grown from rubble. People who had every reason to fall apart but chose instead to rebuild. Jasmine didn't just expose Richard, she redefined what it means to belong. And while Jasmine rose, Richard fell in silence. The man who once stood at podiums now stood behind bars, his name scrubbed from plaques, his face blurred out of gala archives. The associates who once toasted his virtue now sued to reclaim the millions they'd poured into his fraud. His 3 ex-wives broke their NDAs and sold memoirs titled Married to a Monster, Life with a Psychopath, and How I Escaped a Killer. The university removed his name from its library. The church that once praised him now refused his letters. Even the golf club he funded erased the tournament bearing his name. But the most brutal punishment wasn't the silence. It was the noise. Every news cycle, every donation to Jasmine's foundation, every photo of her cutting a ribbon where his statue used to stand. His cell was cold, but her legacy was on fire. The final letter he sent came through Margaret. I was young and stupid, he wrote. If you really are my daughter, please forgive me. Jasmine didn't read the rest. She tore it in half. Forgiveness was not the currency of murderers. And even if she had given it, it wouldn't have bought back a single day she spent wondering why she wasn't worthy of being remembered. Because here's the truth. The best revenge isn't ruin. It's resurrection. Jasmine didn't just survive Richard's sins. She built something permanent in their place. And every child her foundation rescued was another brick in the house she built with the wreckage of his lies. So if you've ever felt erased, forgotten, or left behind by the people who were supposed to protect you, hear this. Your past may not be your fault, but your legacy is still yours to build. You are not the sum of what they took from you. You are what you decide to plant in the space they left behind. Jasmine did more than expose corruption. She became a lighthouse for every child lost in a system built on silence, and if her story lit even one fire inside you, it's because that light was always yours to begin with. Now take that light, share it, use it, because someone else is still waiting in the dark, wondering if the storm will ever pass. Show them that survival isn't the end. It's the first chapter of something bigger. Jasmine rewrote her story. You can too. And that, right there, is the kind of victory no lie can erase. Leave a comment below to let us know where you are watching from. And if you like fascinating stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have another incredible story, and there are many surprises waiting for you in the next parts.